Good afternoon. My name is Zach Karanovich. I serve as the Graduate Research Assistant here at the Boise Center. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's Luncheon Colloquium, a capital congregation, proximity, community, and ministry for American Statehouse neighborhoods. Before turning things over to Mark for the introduction of our guest speaker, I'd like to offer two quick housekeeping items. As you can see, we're recording this conversation, so please silence your cell phones or chew softly or whatever you might be concerned about. And secondly, we'd like to welcome you back if you're available next week on Tuesday, April the 4th, same time, same location. We will be welcoming Elizabeth Prodromou, whose name I'm sure I'm mispronouncing, to discuss Russia's war in Ukraine 1 year later, Orthodox Christianity, geopolitics, and power. So as always, you can find more information about this and all of our events, past, present, and future on our website, bc.edu/Boise. And I'll now turn it over to Mark.
Great. It's going to be a great pleasure to introduce you to the Reverend Richard Burnett, Dick to his friends, who is an Episcopal priest, recently retired. I put retired in quotation marks here. You're the busiest retired person I've met. From pastoral ministry as rector of Trinity Episcopal Church in Columbus, Ohio. For 24 years, Dick served at Trinity Capitol Square, like Boston's Episcopal Cathedral, St. Paul, an historic capital congregation, and now convention leaders for similar congregations to share best practices and mission strategies for a more robust witness in public life. Raised blocks from the Pennsylvania State Capitol in Harrisburg and ordained at Washington National Cathedral, Dick now resides with his spouse Catherine in Lenox, Massachusetts, the spiritual capital of the Berkshires. So Dick, it's yours. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Susan. Thanks for keeping faith with me over these many months, over a year, and we hit a time that works for most people.
Right.
Really great. I want to say a special hello to Martha Gardner, who is in this Episcopal diocese on the bishop's staff, and she'll say more about her own ministry, but I'm just delighted that Martha was with me a couple of weeks ago at a similar conversation with a dissimilar group. I'll say a word about that in a minute, in Jacksonville, Florida, at a conference, and now has decided to have a second bite at the apple, as the bankers like to say, with us today. Martha, it's always good to be with you.
Good to be with you.
And my friend, our mutual friend Danny Appleyard, called just before this meeting. So if you can, when we adjourn, if we can grab you for a second, we'll place the return call to Dan so you can say
Sounds
hello
good.
as well. Good. So I have some pages for you, and I want to just invite you to use this as a note sheet. There's some area. Does everybody have one?
I have two.
There's some space after Wyoming that you can write. You can write more and notes or anything like that. But this is not, a archival document. It just helps us keep it all straight. Somebody was talking about the old song, singing the song of the capitals and so forth, and playing the game. Trying to get Dover Delaware is always one of the trick ones. So I'm glad Delaware is represented here. So maybe we can begin. As Mark said, I'm actually a native of New York City, but when I was almost 4, we moved to my mother's hometown of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So I'm really a Harrisburger, and I was just there the other day doing a kind of capital congregations thing with folks from the Diocese of Pennsylvania, Episcopal Diocese of Pennsylvania, on gun violence. And I went to the old kindergarten that I went to. And sort of walk through the halls with my colleague and saying, oh yeah, I remember this, I remember that. And I realized I might love this work because when I was 4 years old, I'd walk out of those steps and see the dome of the Pennsylvania State Capitol across the street on that beautiful lawn. It's lifted up high, not exactly like Boston, but lifted up high. And somehow that's become iconic for me. So maybe it has to do with Pine Street Presbyterian Kindergarten. I don't know. But in any event, these things make a difference. Place makes a difference. The first thing that God said to created Adam is, where are you? The beginning of ministry is place. And for people who say, that doesn't matter, or it's all displaced, or that may be an interesting claim and sort of post-structural academic circles, but in congregational life, where are you still matters very, very much. And it matters for the world around. You know, the theological claim is that the God whom we turn to in our lives and devote ourselves to actually chooses to be in a place, in a life, in lives, in communities, in neighborhoods, and in this case, on capital squares and in the center of cities where decisions are being made for hundreds of thousands and actually millions of people locally in states. So having said that, let's say who we are, and I ask you three very simple questions to introduce yourself, and then to add one more to it. So the question is, what is your name and the name that you prefer to go by, if there's a distinction, but just so we know each other's names. Secondly, where are you from? What community are you from, or ministry that you serve, and what is the capital of the place that you are from? And from might mean where you grew up, it might mean where you are now, but what capital do you imagine? Like I was imagining Pennsylvania state capital. And then if the add-on is, if there's a capital congregation that you feel particularly connected to, and if you come out of the Episcopal Church, it may be in this list. If you're Roman Catholic, there may be Roman Catholic cathedrals or churches that would serve that bill. Just tell us what that is too. So name, where you're from, what capital is your capital, and what capital congregation might you come up with. That's the fourth one, is sort of extra credit. So Martha, you've already done this game down in Jacksonville with the Episcopalians, so.
Sure, so I've already forgotten the question. Martha Gardner, and as you said, I'm on the diocesan staff. I serve as missioner for networking and formation, Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts. And I guess, certainly right now I work in the building that's right across the Boston Commons from the Massachusetts Statehouse. But I grew up in Connecticut, and I'm thinking I had no, obviously, relationship with Hartford and the Episcopal Church that's there. So,
okay. And that's very helpful, because I think for the great majority of people, even in our meeting the other day, there were a couple of people who were deer in the headlights, capital. We don't think about state capitals all the time, so thank you.
I answer all the questions if you want on this one. I say you probably better. You listened better.
I'm Owen Fletcher. I go by Owen. I'm from New Jersey, and so the state capital would be Trenton. But I feel like Trenton's very far away if you're in any part of New Jersey that's not Pennsylvania. So I think that maybe like the capital of North Jersey, I'd say Newark. So the Newark Cathedral, built on a hill, you can kind of see it from the
It's a great cathedral.
Yeah. Sacred Heart.
Newark is great.
Yeah.
Is that Bishop Tobin?
Great bishop.
Yeah. Thank you, Owen.
I'm Delphine Garreau. I go by Delphine. I'm from Concord, Massachusetts, and our capital is Boston. I think that's pretty fair to say. And I don't really have a big connection to, it says here, the Cathedral of St. Paul. I've always just kind of stayed really local. We have a really tight-knit community, and we have at least 5 churches in our town, but my one church has been my church for a really long time. So
what church is that?
It's the Holy Family Parish.
Okay. And the Paulist Center is
Yeah.
the capital congregation, I've been told in
Oh,
emails.
That's true.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Very much, yeah.
And we were hoping this conversation could expand to that group too.
Okay.
So we'll work on that.
Okay, cool.
Thanks, Delphine.
Great.
I'm Nick Priest. I'm from Wilmington, Delaware, so I don't really have a strong connection with Dover. So any church that I go to is in Wilmington. I don't really go south to Dover that much. But I pretty much just go to where my grade school was. That's where I always went to church and still go to church.
What's the name of that
It's
parish?
St. Mary Magdalene.
Good. Wonderful. Thank you.
I'm Susan Richard. I go by Susie. I grew up born and raised, grew up in Oak Square in Brighton, so local, Boston, state capital. And all of the churches I went to closed, so I'm a displaced.
If you want to close a church, invite Susie to it.
Started a new presentation. Although St. Columkille's in high school I went to, so that's still open. But then the ones out in Framingham, where I live currently, they've all closed back in 2002.
Well, I want to say
Nothing's
publicly
going
thank
on
you
now.
for your help in making this lunch happen.
Oh.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Emily Caffrey. I go by Emily. I'm from Dover, Massachusetts, which is a small town, like 20 minutes from here. So Boston's also my capital, but I was just trying to think that I don't think I've ever been to Mass in the city of Boston.
If you go to St. Ignatius, you've been to. St. Ignatius here is in
It's
Boston.
technically in Boston. Okay,
There
well
it
then
is.
I take that back.
Oh my gosh.
I'm getting nervous.
Yeah, I was like, so I guess that, but I've never been in to downtown Boston. Growing up, we always just went to the church in my town. That's pretty vibrant. Yeah.
Father Mass's line reminds me of something John attributed to John Wesley, the Anglican priest who was the founder of Methodism. And he famously said, "The world is my parish." So there's a...
That comment's all had trouble.
Yeah, it did indeed. Sir.
I'm Mark Granta, director of the Wesley Center, and as a Jesuit, I lived in a world without bishops, and I have lived in Cambridge for 10 years, and I did at Boston College for 12 years, and I have never set foot in the Cathedral of the Holy Cross in Boston. So I have a perfect record.
Wow.
But you're a New Yorker, aren't you?
I'm an Ohioan. I lived in New York for 20 years. Yeah.
Okay.
I did set foot in St. Patrick's, but
Lovely.
yeah.
Good. Mark, thank you for your
Sure.
generous
Glad to
welcome.
do it.
Dan Jocelyn Smatowski. I was born in Hartford, Connecticut. Grew up outside Hartford. And my mom was actually christened at the Cathedral of Hartford, the Episcopal Cathedral there, Grace. So I have that connection.
Which cathedral?
Grace Cathedral in Hartford.
Christchurch.
Well, Christchurch. Yeah, Grace
Sorry,
was
Bob.
Grace was the one in my town that I grew up in Windsor.
Right,
Christchurch,
right.
of course. And I just moved back here to the Boston area. Most recently, I went to St. David's in Austin, Texas, which is on this list. And so I have connections to a couple of these cathedral
That's when you were on the
locations.
faculty of the seminary.
Yeah, and I used to work at the old bookstore at the cathedral at St. Paul's in Boston. That's where I met my wife. So I love cathedrals. Good places.
That's a cafe.
About half of these are Episcopal cathedrals. We'll say a word about real estate in a minute, but about half. But I had to make a judgment call, and Christchurch Cathedral is probably pretty close in Hartford. It's pretty close to the Statehouse to the Capitol in Hartford. A beautiful building done by a son of the founder of the American Institute of Architects, Richard Upjohn. His son, Richard M. Upjohn, did some magnificent, over-the-top sort of stuff, big gold dome that you see on the highway and everything. And that is a vibrant state capitol with important work that's being done. Martha grew up in Fairfield County, and you could live your life in Fairfield County without paying attention to Hartford.
I did.
And you did. But
And vice versa. I gave a talk at Fairfield University last week. That's the first time I've ever been in Fairfield.
Well, there.
So,
Now we can talk about that. A lot of family.
But the work that Hartford does in terms of the state capital for cities like Bridgeport and New Haven and Waterbury and places where our ministries are emerging is enormous. So I mean, public mission in a place, public ministry and public mission in a place like Hartford should not be overlooked. The issue, though, is Christchurch Cathedral may be the closest. This has to do with proximity. What's closest? Footpath, but also is what's closest in terms of the experience. And I put Trinity Church Hartford, and that might be a fight with people from Hartford. So
Yeah, I think we can talk about that.
we can talk about that.
Because I think what's proximity could be one thing, but if one's closer but doesn't have any kind of relationship with public policy, whatever, but a church is maybe another half mile away, but we can figure that out.
Exactly. Well, that's a very good point.
So
And we experienced this in Jacksonville when St. Luke's Atlanta, which is arguably the closest, but there's some other parishes that are close too. St. Luke's Atlanta was the one named, and the new rector of St. Luke's Atlanta brought 6 people to this gathering of 21. I mean, she wins the prize for bringing in the sheaves that day, and that was extraordinary. And I think some good conversations grew out of that too. So that's the idea of this, is to network. And now we have a new friend in the Diocese of Massachusetts.
Yeah, my name is Megan Sweeney. I hang my hat here full time, but my worlds are colliding right now. And Martha works with my spouse at Diomass. But I'm also a priest in the Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts and just stopped 10 years as a very part-time rector. I grew up in New York City, but left and have spent most of my adult life in the Boston area. And
a proud graduate of the College of the Most Holy Cross.
I'm a proud graduate of the College of the Most Holy Cross. That's right. I was thinking about. I do spend some time occasionally at St. Paul's because it's the cathedral of the diocese. It just happens to be downtown. But I lived in Atlanta for 6 years, and I realized when I was looking at this list, I expected to see St. Philip's, and it's
which is the cathedral.
Yes, St. Philip's. And so your point is well taken that sometimes the cathedral is not the political location of so. I just noticed that when I was looking at the list.
And Atlanta really is interesting on this topic on all kinds of levels. Ecumenically, it's interesting because a paradigmatic, I would say the second most natural capital congregation in the United States is in Atlanta. It's Central Presbyterian Church in Atlanta, where many social issues were born and were advocated from those steps. I mean, very important presence. Frankly, Georgia has been going through so many twists and turns in terms of public life and democracy and challenges to democracy that they've actually cordoned, we were just in Atlanta the other day, cordoned off a section for the protests. So it's literally walled area. People used to go, the idea of a state capitol is it's the people's house. People used to go there and present their grievances. I'm not talking January 6th sort of stuff. No. I'm talking legitimate, nonviolent, organized dissent or advocacy. And now in Georgia, what they've said is we'll put all the protesters over here in this little corral off to the side. And so Central Presbyterian no longer can gather people on the front steps. I mean, tell a church they can't gather people. That's an issue to debate. But,
you should make a note with this list that this is from the Episcopal perspective.
Oh, absolutely.
But I mean, I'm just even thinking of the conversation here. If you think about Massachusetts, you've got the Paulist Center, you've got Park Street Church right there. I mean, looking at the other denominations and stuff like that they themselves can form a network, So I think that
it would be enriched by.
And I was actually talking to the woman who's the rector of King's Chapel,
there we go.
Which is a Unitarian church that uses the Book of Common Prayer. Talking about what wires crossed, but she said they consider themselves the church for the state, for the capital of Massachusetts.
Right.
So it's a Unitarian church. So.
Yeah.
Can I make a suggestion? Can you watch this? Because
Sure. It is about 10 minutes worth.
Like landing.
Well, that's a good. That's a good. That's a good segue to hear from Dean Amy McCreath at the Cathedral of St. Paul. We've been talking about that cathedral church on the Common in Boston.
Hi, everybody. This is Amy McCreath. I serve as the Dean at the Cathedral Church of St. Paul, which is on Tremont Street, across from Boston Common, across from the Park Street T-stop. I'm very sorry that I can't be with you for the important conversation that you're having today, but I'm sending you a little bit of information about the Cathedral as a capital congregation. We are a cathedral for the Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts. And as a cathedral, our job is to amplify the mission of the diocese, which our bishop oversees. Our mission centers on three things. The first is discipleship, the second is justice, and the third is creation care. And so this presentation is going to focus a bit on that justice part, which is so important to our work as a cathedral. Back when St. Paul's became a cathedral in 1918, Bishop Lawrence, who was the bishop of the diocese at the time, cast a vision for a very different kind of cathedral from what you might imagine as a kind of typical cathedral. Bishop Lawrence wasn't very interested in fancy stained glass or a really beautiful boys' choir. He didn't want it to be a fancy place where the fancy people gathered. Instead, he wanted the cathedral to be right in the heart of the city, at a place where people from all manner of styles and cultures and backgrounds and classes of life came together. He wanted it to be right near the Park Street Tea Stop, which had just opened. And he chose our location because of that and because we looked directly up the hill at the Statehouse. He wrote a book called The American Cathedral, and in it, he laid out his theology of cathedrals. One of the things that he said in that book was that he wanted the cathedral to be a place where people from all over the diocese came, met people from all different walks of life, people of different faiths could kneel together and find common ground, and that people would leave the cathedral feeling a bit more courageous for living into our shared mission. So through the decades, the cathedral's done that in a lot of different ways. Right now, we do this basically in 3 different ways. The first is through advocacy for justice. The second is through the Back Home program of our Manna ministry. And the third is through our ministry of the Steps. And before I get into the details of these things, I need to pause to explain the Manna ministry just a bit. So our cathedral has 3 congregations, one of which is called Manna. And Manna is made up of people experiencing homelessness. They are not an outreach ministry. They are a congregation of the cathedral. And it is our conviction that the church is not complete until everyone, especially those on the margins, is in the building and contributing their gifts to the body of Christ. Because we work so closely with people experiencing homelessness, and because of the neighborhood that we're located in, our commitments radiate out from the experience of the people in our community, especially around housing injustice and homelessness. So, our advocacy. Right now, we are partnering with 3 different organizations to try to bring greater justice and healing into the world. The first is the Poor People's Campaign, which operates at the national level and is an extension of the campaign begun by Martin Luther King Jr. back in the late 1960s, just before his death. They also operate at the state level, and we work with the Massachusetts Poor People's Campaign. And in that, we advocate for justice and for a moral revival in our country at the state level. As you may know, the Poor People's Campaign is a fusion movement that believes that the major kinds of injustice that lots of organizations work against are all interconnected, and that we need to address all of them rather than just isolating one of them. The second group that we partner with very consistently is the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. And I don't think I need to explain to you why this is so important to us. The scourge of gun violence is growing, affecting so many people in so many different ways, and saddening our hearts as we know that the leading cause of death for teenagers in our country is suicide. And third, not surprisingly, we work closely with the Massachusetts Coalition for the Homeless. And this is advocacy at the Statehouse for all manner of changes to funding and to laws that would take more guns off the street, make them harder to get, especially for those for whom the likelihood of using them for violent purposes is highest. The second area that we work in is through a program called Back Home, which we began in partnership with the City of Boston about 10 years ago. Back Home stands for the Boston Advisory Committee on Homelessness. And it is a group of people who have experienced chronic homelessness or housing instability with 2 members of our staff, our Manna team, partnering with the Mayor's Office on Homelessness. And it gives voice to those who've experienced homelessness, helps them to advise the Mayor's Office on policy, on how to make life in shelters better and safer, and how to create community that helps sustain people experiencing homelessness. And finally, for the last several years, we have run a program in the summer called the Ministry of the Steps. And this is a way that we bring the values of the cathedral out the front doors of the cathedral onto the plaza in front of the cathedral. And we do this not to be evangelical, but rather to help create community and to create a kind of public backdrop for advocating for justice, so that legislators on their way up the Hill, groups working for change and heading to the Hill for protests and for legislative action days, students at Suffolk University and Emerson on either side of us, people going into the financial district or going shopping in downtown Crossing, all of them can learn and be motivated to work for the civic betterment. So the Ministry of the Steps involves everything from making prayer flags to asking people what gives them hope, to giving out a lot of lemonade, to inviting groups like the Coalition Against Gun Violence to come and put up a display. One of the pictures here shows last summer's kind of public vigil naming those who had died due to gun violence in the last few months. The transgender rights groups come and set up a table. Sometimes Boston Public Health comes and gives out information about public health. So it's a really beautiful program, and it's a lot of fun too. So these are all the ways that we try to live into Bishop Lawrence's vision and live into our call, our vocation to be a cathedral in the city and to be a capital congregation. I'd be glad to talk with any of you more about what we're doing and how we can partner with you, and I'm very thankful for the work that you're doing in your locations. Take care.
Great. So that really summarizes. I'm sorry that Dean Amy couldn't be with us, but that really summarizes the idea, and I'm so grateful. I'm going to keep that as an archive for this project for sure, and share it with other capital congregations. I think coming out of the meeting in Jacksonville, that group is going to try to Zoom with one another and be part of that conversation. And I think we all need to have a chance to look at that together. So only 8.5 minutes, and it's really summarizing. So the questions that were asked in Jacksonville, and I would ask it of all the places that you named that are capital congregations, are twofold. One, on the one hand, why are these churches here? Dean Amy talked about the vision of Bishop William Lawrence right around the time of World War I. Why is it here? Trinity Columbus has an answer that goes back to the 1830s when the Statehouse was built in Ohio. Not that long after statehood. Dover, why is the capital in Dover? You said you're in Wilmington. I never go to Dover. I don't go down there. But why is it there? Some states have state capitals in the main city. Boston, Georgia, sort of Austin. I don't know. Okay. But I mean, there's a sort of a spirit. I don't know what the history of getting it there. Probably Stephen Austin. Okay, good. But some states have it in the main city, others not. Illinois, my Pennsylvania,
Albany
for sure. Yeah, good. And so why are these state capitals there is one question, but then why are these congregations connected, often in very close proximity or nearby, as St. Luke's Atlanta would be a good example of nearby. St. David's Austin would be nearby. And then the question is, well, with that, why are they there and why are they still there, which is a fair question to ask coming out of the experience of American urban change in the 1950s and 60s, post-war America, 50s, 60s, 70s, where cities, people left, many institutions left, many congregations left the heart of the city. And then, what difference does it make? What difference might it make? So I've got a couple of scholars here who I would love to be at the table, but as I told somebody before, I'm a librarian's kid and an only child, so these are not just weapons for me, these are companions on the journey. When I talk about a book, it's not just I'm trying to prove a point, I'm actually trying to share a voice with the conversation. So let me just say something about bibliography. Gorski, I don't know. He's in the faculty at Yale. He's a political scientist. But this is a remarkable book for the scope, the sweep of understanding. He takes a position, history of civil religion from the Puritans to the present. Mark, I don't know if you know, but you work with Finke and Stark's book. This might be an interesting, not corrected, but an interesting dance partner.
Two of these people just read.
Okay, this might be an interesting. It's written more recently than that. A different approach, but sociology again.
Can you pass that around?
So that. Oh, sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Wuthnow's kind of the Moses of sociology of religion in some way. I mean, just a terribly important figure. Just retired from Princeton University and writes prolifically in this book, which is called Why Religion is Good for American Democracy. I think that's a pretty provocative title. Wuthnow says the following. The claim I make in the following pages is that religion is good for American democracy, less because of the unifying values it might provide, and more because of religion's capacity to bring diverse values, interests, and moral claims into juxtaposition with one another. Through its diversity, religion contributes to the contending beliefs, values, arguments, and counter-arguments that constitute the debate about how to order our lives together. People who care about religion, including those who doubt its value, vehemently disagree with one another and take adversarial positions toward one another. This diversity, these diverging practices, and the moral convictions that they imply animates American democracy, sometimes in ways that pose questions about whether we can agree on anything, but more often with robust outcomes that reflect advocacy and counter-advocacy. Religion, therefore, is good for American democracy, not because it calms us down, but because, but not because it calms us down, but because it actually invigorates us and sharpens our capacity, as the late senator from New York, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, said, one can disagree without being disagreeable. But it gives us capacity for a healthy, potent disagreement, which is at the heart of democracy. Now, those are both relatively new books. Wuthnow's book, I think, was 2021. This one I found in a bookstore just the other day, and I shelled out for it because it speaks exactly to the project that I'm talking about. This is by a political scientist. They're both sociologists. This is a political scientist who I don't know. Assistant professor of political science at the University of Washington. This was his doctoral dissertation maybe 7-9 years ago at the University of California, Berkeley. I don't know, in the academic field, I don't know if you'd say, this would feel like it's still hot off the press to me. Its imprint is 2022. In the world I travel in theology and sociology of religion, you don't trust it until it's a few years to test it out in a way. But this is a very interesting take. The title is Laboratories Against Democracy, and it's covering over of. That's a direct quote. Laboratories of Democracy is a direct quote of the great jurist and Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, who said about the time of World War I that the states are laboratories for democracy. The states are laboratories for democracy. For many of us, we tend to think that the state government is sort of the AAA club in the baseball metaphor. In other words, it's the summer stock theater. It's not Broadway. Broadway is Washington. You pay attention to the presidential election year, and you might pay attention to off years, but it's always about Congress. It's always about the Senate and it's not the state governments. And yet more and more and more issues are being are being decided, including gerrymandering, by the way, in state legislatures. And what we have now, pass that this way, what we have now in places like Tennessee, just with the violence in the school just the other day, places like Georgia and other places, Texas and other places with voter suppression and other issues about reproductive justice and a variety of issues. That is happening in the state level. The question then is, what difference does it make that we have capital congregations there? And there might be people that say, no difference than the church 300 miles away that can advocate about issues. We have an organization in the Episcopal Church called Episcopal Public Policy Network, EPPN. And that has been a great galvanizer for the voice of the Episcopal Church. It's small, but I hope it's true, can be mighty.
I think it's very similar to Network, right? The
Dick?
Catholic
Network. You have 10 minutes time, so I want to start a conversation.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
I think there are 3 reasons that capital congregations will not work. So this is a challenge to you.
Sure. I need more than 3 minutes to respond.
You're not allowed to respond to this, but I want to hear other people responding. First of all, religion is no longer a unifying force in our culture. Religion is a very divisive force, and certainly among Catholics. The left and the right are very divided. So the very things you're talking about, and the very things that Amy so eloquently pointed to, I know Catholics who would look at that and say, oh, another pointy-headed liberal. So she's reducing, I'm completely on board with her thing, but they would say, oh, they're reducing Christianity to social justice. It's about the social gospel. And so for Catholic conservatives, that would not be a welcoming thing. That's a very much a divisive thing and makes them suspicious of precisely people who want cathedrals to act in that way. Secondly, I think it's very hard to figure out what we should do. You know, Anton Phelps Stokes, who wrote the big 2-volume study of Church and State America, he said the Constitution separated the institutions of church and state and unified the impulses of religion and politics. So while the institutions are divided, religion and politics are sort of wedded together. And I know that for people that I talk to who are in charge of big urban parishes, it's not clear what their job is. It's not clear what their job specifically as a religious institution is to minister to the culture, because you don't want to, you know, as the demonstrators outside of St. Patrick's Cathedral across the street always chant, keep your rosaries off my ovaries, you know. So in other words, a very, very strong church stance against, say, abortion evokes strong negative reactions as well as positive reactions, you know. And the third thing is, I think the language, religious politicians lack a language. I mean, you could argue the most religious person to run for office in the 20th century was Hillary Rodham Clinton, you know, who was a member of the Foundry Methodist Church. Very demanding Methodist church in Washington, D.C., where you have to give socialists.
That's a capital congregation.
That's a capital congregation. But, you know, she was, Democrats have seemed to lost the language of religion. Like Biden carries around a rosary, for God's sakes, in his pocket, and yet he is perceived as a godless man. I've heard bishops refer to President Biden as that godless man in the White House. So it's kind of like finding the language is a difficult thing. I mean, and for whatever sets of reasons, a whole set of politicians seem reticent to go there. No, those are mass opinions. Those are not universal opinions. Zach, do you want to take me on this?
No, not necessarily.
Because you're writing about something like this.
Yeah, I've sort of been of the opinion for some time that the political tail wags the religious dog, that we're interpreting our religion through the lenses of our politics in such a way that our parishes are no longer parishes of neighborhood boundaries, but parishes of destination. So, you know, you're either progressive Catholic going to the liberal Catholic Church, a conservative traditional Catholic going to the Latin Mass at this parish down the road, or you're in the vast middle who are oblivious to the conversations that are happening in politics or in sort of ecclesial politics. So I think the church has something of an identity crisis at the moment about how it is to reclaim itself independent from its political categorizing or the labels that it inherits. And there's no sense of a third way. There's no sense of a third way, meaning I'm not going to be complicit. I'm not going to reject politics, but I'm going to somehow navigate some new path forward in being the leaven in society, in the political society.
Yeah, I think it's a question of, as Mark was gesturing towards also, I think you're getting at that, in the Episcopal Church context of attention between its establishment identity, its aspirations towards representing the establishment, and this movement that's happened since the Second World War of taking on a prophetic voice. And Robert Tobin's just written a really excellent book on this called Privilege and Prophecy, about kind of the transformation of the Episcopal Church from an establishment view to a social justice prophetic view. And what that does is it actually, the church wants to claim a voice at the table, but also wants to act as a cultural critic of everyone around the table. And can you occupy both spots at the same time? And I wonder if that's part of the narrative of capital congregations also, is wondering, like, how do I get at the table if I also want to voice critique at the table?
Absolutely. Sorry, go ahead.
No.
Well, I this comes out of my own personal experience, and I think it's a good thing that I didn't convene this while I was the rector. I couldn't have made it happen because there were just other things that were distracting me to get to. But now that I'm not the rector, the incumbent, as the English Church said, I have time and a little more distance to be able to say, this is what I experienced and this is what I see. I mean, one of the issues was a place like Trinity Columbus wants to be a place of gathering, of community celebration, of respite and hope for people who are struggling. And the most powerful thing that anybody ever said to me about the ministry at Trinity Church was by a person who didn't come to church at Trinity ever, except during the week for a period of time when Ohio had a deficit budget, profound deficit budget coming out of the economic downturn of 2008, 2009. She came up to me at a concert, the women's chorus concert on a Sunday evening, and she said, "Father, I'm such and such a name," and I recognized the name because she was in the newspaper. She was Governor Ted Strickland's budget manager, Office of Budget in the state. And she said, "I just want you to know this church saved my life." And I said, I take it seriously. What does that mean? And she said, there was a time when it was all I could do to go across 3rd Street from the Capitol, come in here, sit in a pew, and weep. That this year has been the hardest year of my life, professionally and personally. And all I could do was sit in here and weep. And I thought to myself, this is why Trinity Church is on Capitol Square and remains on Capitol Square. That's the first reason, to be a place of welcome, of succor. I mean, just help. But it's not just that. It's also a place where you had celebrations.
Let's hear what you.
Yeah.
Okay, Martha or
Go ahead.
Megan. Says that you just
How long did
you just stepped down from a congregation.
I did. We were right across from City Hall. But you talked in the beginning about place, and I don't. What I can say is this, and Owen knows this because I talk a lot in the Pulse class about the importance of taking public transportation as a way to orient into place and space. I was quarter time. I had no connection at all with the city I was the rector in, and that, I think, had a profoundly negative impact on the congregation because I was not able to go to events. I was not able to be a presence in the community, and I think that was a detriment to the parish. So when you're talking about your Trinity and the ability to be open and be present and to be a place where people can come, I think is really powerful. And there's something to be said about people, clergy, others living where their parishes are so they can be part of community. So it's mostly a comment more about place than about the sort of political nature. But I wonder if I had been more present in Attleboro, if we would have not had more of an impact on whatever the local city politics were at the time.
Martha, do you have any reflections?
No, I'd love to hear from these folks, but also I just liked when you said the church was across from City Hall. And again, remembering that's the other thing. How many of our congregations are proximity to City Hall when a lot of stuff happens?
How many lawmakers from Beacon Hill go to St. Paul's Church? Do you have a sense that?
I don't think any.
Yeah, I would be surprised.
I don't think any. Nothing.
Charlie Baker ever come over there?
I mean, Byron Rushing, of course, is an active member of the Episcopal Diocese, but he does not attend the cathedral. He attends, I think, St. Stephen's in the south end. But,
Yes.
And whatever. But I'm just curious what you all have to say.
Well, that's also something that I was wondering, in terms of there might be a place for people to go when they feel overwhelmed or something to an idea of place in that, but how many people are actually parishioners and attending this, or is it an outside force that people can gather that is just close to the capital versus a place that people can gather because they are coming from the capital? So a mix between these two worlds rather than a separation of the two.
That's interesting because I don't think like the Cathedral Church of St. Paul has ever said to the state legislature, we don't want you to be members, but just know this is a safe place for you to come during the week if you want to escape. If that's what I hear you almost saying. What this woman did in a way, like that people know that place, they're not going to be members there. They could be Catholic, Jewish, whatever, they go somewhere else, but they know at least during the week if they need a safe, quiet place to come, that the cathedral could serve that
I
purpose.
just thought it was a great
It's a
paper,
great idea.
research paper. In terms of Boston, and Martha, you mentioned that, so St. Paul's, there's Park Street Church, there's the Paul Center,
There's King's Chapel.
It'd be interesting to see which one of those houses of worship draws the most state legislators.
As members or just to kind of come as, yeah.
It'd be interesting.
I would think that most of them don't live there.
You wouldn't get many members.
Yeah,
because of
they don't live there.
Well, it's a weekday ministry. I
Yeah.
mean, Perry came across. Perry's the one.
I bet the Paul Center has weekday masses. I bet they get. I bet they get.
Yeah, I know Kerry goes there. Kerry was a member of Paul's Center, so I preached there one time and he was there.
I know you need to, but when I cooked this up 24 years ago, I realized there were 3 legitimate responses of capital congregation, and often they're all happening at once. There's an illegitimate response, and that says keep the doors closed and pretend the capital's not there. And unfortunately, some of these churches are pretty much in that category. I mean, just candidly, they are. But we're talking about the ones that are alive and open. The three things are have your doors open and welcome people. That's a no-brainer, okay? The second is be a place of public gathering and celebration. Church-state problems with that, but somehow the cathedral in Topeka, Kansas does a major liturgy every time a new legislature is elected and sworn in. It's weird. How do they get away with it? They're Kansas is my answer. I mean, they do church state stuff differently in Kansas. Okay, and then the third. But there are wonderful prayers in the prayer book about Episcopal.
I'm talking about prayer breakfast like they do down at the National Cathedral.
And then the third way is a place of public protest, advocacy, dissent. Okay, I always said the more you do number 3, the dissent, the less you're going to be invited to do the public gatherings. However, the more you do number 3, the more you might develop the trust in people to welcome them in times of need. That's a thesis. That's not a claim, but
Please join me in thanking Dick for his presentation.
Thank you.